Good morning, colleagues. My name is Luca Perez. I'm deputy of unit in the unit dealing with sustainable freshwater management at the European Commission, and I'm very pleased to participate or to at least send this video message to the national seminar on river and wetland restoration to share the experience of the European Commission on the subject. It's very unfortunately I was not able to be with you today. But I'm very glad that at least, even if online, I can deliver this to you. Um, Let me move on straight on the subject of my presentation. The importance of protecting and restoring freshwater ecosystems can hardly be overestimated. We know that European rivers and wetlands are invaluable resources that provides huge benefits, not only for the environment, for biodiversity, for climate, but also for everything related to food protection from disasters. Of course, they have a huge cultural and emotional value as well. Um, Unfortunately, though, as we know, science is telling us that freshwater ecosystems are some of the ecosystems that are the most endangered in the world. And the EU or the European continent is not an exception. Inland waters and freshwater ecosystems, we have lost 85% of the world's wetlands in the last centuries. Freshwater species population has suffered for an 81% decline. And the causes, of course, are multiple, but they're mostly related to land use and sea use change, causing ecosystem loss, but also river fragmentation, which leads to modification of flows, barriers to migration and sediment transport, deterioration of habitats, and the lack of, respect of ecological flows. And the impacts are very obvious and are increasingly felt on the citizens' daily lives. We see it in terms of resilience to climate change, increased exposures to water-related risks such as floods, but also drought, risks in relation to our water supply that come both from threat related to water quality and quantity, and of course the ability that we have to really enjoy this unique and precious ecosystems. Focusing in particular on the issue of fragmentation, what I wanted to show you on this slide is the outcome of very important projects called adaptive management of barriers in European rivers, which just gives us a full sense of how much European rivers are fragmented. The project estimated that there are about 1 million barriers across the main European rivers, which means basically one barrier every 2 kilometers. 85% of these barriers are small, and many of these are actually obsolete and no longer in use. So we are paying a huge price in terms of fish migration impacts on environment and species, fish migration, sediment movement, disruption of hydromorphological processes for barriers that very often do not bring any benefits, and they are most of the time a cost for society. Um, of course, when it comes to protection and restoration of freshwater ecosystems, the EU has equipped itself with a very solid, legislation at European level. Going back to the Habitats Directive, which, as many of you already know, covers a number of freshwater ecosystems, but also with the Water Framework Directive of 2000, which creates an obligation for member states to achieve good ecological status and good chemical status for EU water bodies, and provides mechanisms for integrated water resources management at the river basin level. Of course, we have also taken action on some flagship species such as seals and sturgeon, and these efforts, of course, have to be taken into consideration, taken into the context of the wider EU strategies on biodiversity protection. The latest of which is the Biodiversity Strategy to 2030, of which I will be talking about very, very shortly. Of course, the issue of river continuity is very much at the heart of the EU efforts to protect and restore freshwater ecosystems. And the EU biodiversity strategy provides a specific focus when it comes to the protection of freshwater ecosystems, mostly based on trying to accelerate and enhance the implementation of the Water Framework Directive and of the Habitats Directive. The three key pillars, of course, that I would like to highlight are, on the one hand, the increased effort that the EU has committed to in terms of restoring freshwater ecosystem and the natural functions of river by precisely accelerating progress toward reaching the objectives of the Water Framework Directive by 2027, but also a specific goal to restore at least 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers. This will be achieved mostly through removing primarily obsolete barriers. And from this point of view, the objective actually goes a bit beyond the legal obligations foreseen under the Water Framework Directive, but also, and equally importantly, the restoration of floodplains and wetlands, which also play a huge role in terms of ensuring river connectivity. Finally, a key strand of work under the biodiversity strategy is, of course, the restoration and preservation of ecological flows, with an obligation of member states to review water abstraction and impoundments permits precisely to ensure that the minimum ecological flows that are necessary to keep the good ecological status and chemical status of EU water bodies are maintained and met by 2027. When it comes to the objective to restore the 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers, a key action that has been taken at EU level is the development of a dedicated guidance document on barrier removal for river restoration. Recognizing, of course, that the primary responsibility for action is with the member states, and the decision making needs to be taken at the local level. But there is still a need to enhance and support the effort of member states. The guidance on barrier removal aims to provide technical guidance for member states in particular to identify the sites and help also to mobilize funding to reach the overall goal by 2030 at EU level. The main components of this guidance, which is available on the European Commission website in all the EU languages, but I understand an executive summary is also available in Norwegian, covers the following key elements. First of all, the definition of free-flowing rivers, so that there is a common understanding between the European Commission and the member states about what a free-flowing river is and how to turn this definition into concrete actions on the ground. The guidance also explains the interplay between the targets and the EU legal framework, in particular in relation to the Water Framework Directive and the Habitats and Birds Directive, along the lines of what I've described earlier on. It also provides a summary of knowledge currently available at EU level, and provide guidance on data collections, tool and strategies for action at river basin scales. And of course, as I was saying, also provides information of existing EU financing tools that member states and stakeholders can mobilize to support this action. But delving into the definition included in the guidance note, I mean, it may appear as intuitively easy, but it's actually fairly complex because when you look at it, there is no established consensus, or there was no established consensus as to what criteria would define a free-flowing river, and no ready-to-use indicators to measure it. So in consultation with member states and stakeholders in the context of the Common Implementation Strategy for the Water Framework Directive, the Commission has developed and proposed the following definition. A free-flowing river is one that supports connectivity of water, sediments, nutrients, matter, and organism within the river system and with surrounding landscapes in all dimensions, and is not impaired by anthropogenic barriers, and is not disconnected from its floodplains when a floodplain is present. To be noted that natural impediments such as wooded debris, waterfall, beaver dams are not considered as barriers for the purpose of the guidance note. To explain a bit more in practice what this is about, the main focus is both on longitudinal and on lateral connectivity of river ecosystems, because this is where we have also more knowledge and experience. The focus is also on primarily on obsolete barriers, given the scale of their presence on the ground, and the fact that their removal can actually bring win-win benefits, both for the environment and society. And also, the focus is on complementary measures in relation to the restoration of the surrounding floodplains and wetlands. The focus is of the actual actions is on removing artificial barriers, both transversal and lateral, wherever such opportunity exists, but also, and this is a work that is still ongoing with member states, to define a set of harmonized criteria to actually measure and account for the river stretches that could be defined as free-flowing, so that at EU level we will have some agreed matrices to measure progress towards the 2030 goal. What we proposed in the guidance is also some general principles, particularly related to maximizing synergies with existing legislation and strategies, particularly in relation to EU legislations on protected areas, on microdori species, of course, the Water Framework Directive and daughter legislation, but also careful assessment of existing uses, maximization of co-benefits to avoid significant impacts on sustainable users that might be already out there. Of course, another key area is improving data collection to fill gaps in knowledge. Um, as I was saying, some work is still ongoing and will be coming up with further output when it comes to the criteria that we'll have to agree with member states and the related methodology to actually measure and define free-flowing rivers. But let me move on to another important part of what the EU is doing in terms of river and freshwater ecosystem restoration, which is the Commission proposal for a nature restoration law. The law is one of the pillars of the biodiversity strategy. It was triggered basically by the reflection that we have reached such a state or bad state in terms of biodiversity loss at EU level that simply trying to protect what is left of our biodiversity is clearly not enough. And the voluntary targets, both in terms of protection and restoration in the previous biodiversity strategy, were obviously not met. This calls for focusing on recovering our biodiversity and to go for a reinforced approach with legally binding targets for member states. So this is the essence of the Commission proposal, which aims to achieve large-scale restoration efforts by, on the one hand, complementing the existing policy framework available at EU level, focusing on synergies with other policy goals, in particular in relation to climate change, but also disaster risk reduction, with a clear focus on restoring first those ecosystems that can also play a role across these policy goals, and by proposing a set of specific restoration targets against which progress will be measured at EU level. In the slides, you can see the key ecosystems and species which are subject to specific restoration targets under the law. As you can see, the link with the existing EU law, for instance, the Natures Directive, is very obvious. But as you can see, there is also a specific focus on river connectivity, which is very much linked to the Water Framework Directive and the 25,000 kilometers target for free-flowing rivers. In the slides, I'm just summarizing or showing you what type of habitats are already included in the nature directives so that you can have a look at the relevance in terms of freshwater ecosystems. But let me focus here, and I'm getting close to the end of my presentation, to the core Article 7 on river connectivity in the proposal, which commits member states to identify and remove barriers that prevent the connectivity of surface waters to contribute both to the targets for restoration of riverine habitats and ecosystems, and also, as I was saying, the objective of restoring at least 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers in the EU by 2030. The key components of this exercise will be the obligation to prepare an inventory, identifying the barriers to be removed, and develop at the level of member states a plan and a timetable that should be included in the national restoration plans that will be an obligation under the new law. And of course, this will have to be complemented by other measures to complement the removal of the barriers. As for those of you who have been following the political debate at EU level, the negotiations for the nature restoration law have been quite complicated, but they have moved now surprisingly quickly, with the Council achieving, so the Member States reaching a common position in June 2023, the Parliament having reached an agreement on their position in July 2023, and trialogues having moved quite quickly under the Spanish presidency. A final trialogue, so the discussion between Commission, European member states and the Council and the Parliament, will be taking place on the 9th of November. And this will hopefully lead us to a conclusion and a final agreement by the co-legislator early in the new year, so that the implementation of this important piece of legislation can move in earnest. This is the end of my presentation. I hope I've managed in this little time to provide you a snapshot of EU action, and would like to wish you a productive seminar, and I look forward to future opportunities to interact with all of you. Thank you very much for your attention.